Our point of departure is that most policymaking involves sequential choices. Politicians in office make typically more than one choice between moments of accountability. And although there is a significant literature on multitask, there isn't so much on the consequences of the sequential nature of the choices. And this is what this paper and some of the other papers that we've done is supposed to be about. One of the other things I want to mention, by way of motivating it, is that there's a robust evidence of intertemporal distortions in the agent's choices. The most famous of which is what have you done for me lately effect, whereby agents overinvest relative to the what might be considered to be efficient allocation, overinvest later in the term and underinvest earlier in the term. Of course, to be able to say something about it, you want to think about politicians making choices in sequence, so you want to model a sequential policy choice. There are some models that we know about that I mentioned here, Serafidis and Muto and Shepsley, which do this, but they make explicit assumption of recency bias, and one of the things that we want to do is to show that we can generate this effect without abrogating our standard rationality assumptions. So we're going to have a model of moral hazard with sequential policy making, in which agents' choices are going to be preceded by communications from the principal, and I will make clear why we do this and exactly what form they take in a moment. And the principal is going to have retention authority at fixed moments of accountability. So the first thing I want to mention about this is that the retention authority, as opposed to a broader menu of tools that, say, contract theorists might use to analyze behavior, the principles typically conforms to our expectations for what happens in political settings generally. So this is I guess, a tidy way of modeling it. But the fixed retention authority at fixed moments, retention authority at fixed moments of accountability in particular corresponds to what we see in a large number of senior government bureaucratic appointments. I've listed here the alphabet soup of U.S. agencies: IRS. Everybody knows what that is. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FAA, National Transportation Safety Board. Then the commissions that everybody loves, like SEC, FTC, FCC. There are examples at the EU level. This is the European Food Safety Administration. In France, we have Competition Authority, PCA, PSA. I don't remember what it stands for, but I know it regulates banks. HHA regulates provision of healthcare. So these are examples of agencies where the governments, right, typically the president, in the US and France, this would be the president, are appointing politicians for fixed terms of office, right, and politicians are obviously going to be making multiple choices while in office, and then there are moments of accountability. So I want you to keep those in the back of your head. So here are main results. There are two. One is what we describe as a political time inconsistency problem for the principles, and it will be in the form of the principal's inability to effectively commit to a retention rule that would guarantee to the principal's higher level of utility. And you're going to see what the commitment problem comes about, how the commitment problem comes about. And the second result is going to be a novel argument for the value of eliminating transparency in political settings. Now, there's an extensive literature on transparency and why transparency might not be a good thing that grew out of these three papers: Prendergast, Keynes, Rowan, Karen, and Schatz, and Maskin and Troll, and it continues into the present. And the way those arguments typically work is in the adverse selection environment, in which the agents have an incentive to pool through the choices they're making, right? They have an incentive to pool with something that is described as a congruent type, right? Which is the type that the voter would like, or the principal would like to retain. So the pandering argument turns on the agent's investment into reputation. In our environment, you're going to see an argument against transparency, which will come from the fact that elimination of transparency makes it possible for the principals to make a commitment to deferring to the agent when the production technology is sufficiently uncertain, and that's what the agent would, and that's what the principal would want to do. In the presence of transparency, he won't be able to do this, and so this is the eliminating transparency is going to buy him the way out of the time inconsistency problem. We'll talk about the model. The model will have two policy stages. Each policy stage will start with a message, communication from the principal to the agent, followed by agent's choice. And after the second policy stage, there is a retention stage in which the principal chooses whether to retain or fire the agent. And we're going to give the agent total amount of resources, a bar, and we'll look at several models, several portions of this model, but we'll start with a model where each of the two investments is capped. So the first investment is up to A1 bar, and the second investment is up to A2 bar. And the probability of successful outcome, and again, the principal is going to observe the outcome in this model. The outcome is going to be success or failure. The probability of successful outcome is going to be P, which is going to be increasing in A1, A2. It's going to be concave and satisfying another. So here the preference is the agent is going to care about retention and resources not spent on policy. He's going to get B if he retained. That's the benefit, fixed benefit of holding office, and the residual of what he is not spending. Right? Think of this as a graft payoff. And if not retained, right, he gets to keep the graft payoff, and of course doesn't get to benefit of holding office. And the principal is just going to care about success. So the solution concept is an important part of the story here. In pure moral hazard games, there are lots of sub-imperfect Nash equilibria, and the way the equilibria are typically selected in political science.
This is after 2 periods is done.
After periods were done. So
the only reason why the principal retain
is going to be moral hazard. He will want to motivate the choices up front. So at the point, right, he's not actually going to be indifferent, as you will see.
Okay.
Right, we're going to generate a preference for the principal to behave in one way as opposed to another. So the standard move, right, for the selection argument is to say, let's focus on the equilibrium that maximizes the principal's welfare, right? And the intuition that is typically given is that you can think about the principal as making an announcement at the beginning of the game, right, of a retention rule, and at the point of actually casting the ballot, the principal is indifferent, right, and so he can implement the retention rule that he announced at the beginning. Right. Here we're going to model dynamic policymaking, so we want to make the communication explicit, and as you're going to see in a moment, this is going to create subtleties in what it is that the principal will want to say and when the principal wants to say. And so the intuition for the solution concept we're going to adopt is that we want the equilibrium to be robust to small revision costs. Now, you can think about these costs as being partly psychological, right? Psychological costs of lying, where the principal is going to make one announcement and going to retain you if and only if, right, the policy or the choices we're making are at a certain level, and then fail to follow through. Or you can think of them as reputational costs. But the idea is we want to choose the equilibria that are going to be robust to the existence of these small costs of revision. And so formally, you can think about the equilibrium, our equilibrium, as the limit of a sequence of equilibria in a sequence of nearby games with ever smaller costs of altering declared retention rule between the stages. And by the way, this is you can think of this as an extension of the standard selection criterion, because in games without sequential policymaking, it's going to select the maximal welfare. So what happens under this criterion? So in the retention stage, right, the principal is just going to apply the rule that was declared in the final policymaking stage. That's easy. In the second policymaking stage, the agent is going to choose the second action, right, that is going to be best responding to the declared retention rule by the principal, M2, right, given the history A1. Now the principal is going to declare, M2, he's going to declare the retention rule that when best responded to by the agent is going to maximize A2, right? And that means that he will want to revise his initial announcement for low enough revision costs if there is sufficient amount upside. Right? In the first policymaking stage, the agent is going to be anticipating that the principal will have the incentive to revise. And so the agent is going to be selecting A1 that is going to be best responding to the anticipated declaration M2. Right? And of course, the principal anticipating this will be forward-looking, and so he will declare retention rule M1 that best responded to is going to be maximizing A1, again, subject to the principal not wanting to revise the retention rule once the opportunity to make the second announcement comes about. In the second stage, the principal is going to declare a rule to extract as much of the second choice as possible, right, given the history A1. He can induce A2 prime following A1 if the expected value of re-election, right? Expected fixed benefit of being re-elected, plus the graph payoff is going to give to the agent at least as much as what he gets by taking everything and foregoing the prospect of re-election. In particular, in equilibrium, he's going to be able to induce A2 that's going to be the minimum of either A2 bar, where the agent is maxing out in the second location, or A2 hat of A1, right, which is going to be this at equality, right, exactly at equality. Now, notice that he can induce A2 equal to A2 bar at histories with A1 less or equal to this value, right, A2 hat of A1. Let me skip that part. If A1 is less than this value of A1 hat, right, that's the value of A1 hat that allowed the principal to set the agent's incentive compatibility condition at equality. The principal must announce a rule that is going to induce A2 equal to A2 bar. Right, that's from the solution from our solution concept argument. The principal doesn't have to provide guaranteed retention for that, right? Following the value of A1 that's less than this A1 hat, right? The lowest payoff he can give while inducing A2 equal to A2 bar, following this lower value of A1, right, is this. That's the utility that the agent would get from giving the principal nothing in the second allocation, right, following the history of A1, right? And the highest payoff the principal can give while inducing A2 equal to A2 bar, following again this lower value of A1, is going to be, right, B, expected value of holding office at B, right? So giving to him with certainty, right? Plus the utility that the agent would get, given that he's giving to the principal the whole of A2 bar, right? So whatever the graph from the first choice. Okay. So this is going to give, this wedge is going to give the principal leeway, right, for inducing A1 full, right, in anticipation of inducing A2 bar. What the principal wants to do is to maximize A1 subject to inducing A2 bar, right? And so suppose he wants to induce A1 prime. He wants to make this value A1 prime, right, given the expected A2 bar as attractive as possible, and make all the other pairs as unattractive as possible. He can credibly do that, right, if he sets the expected value of getting the fixed benefit, right, plus what the agent gets, given that he is spending A2 bar, the full of A2 bar, right, greater or equal to what the agent gets to keep from the start, right, when he chooses to give the principal absolutely nothing. Right? And so what we get is that the highest, right, in equilibrium, the highest A1 that the principal can credibly induce is going to be either A1 bar, right, or is going to be this value A1 tilde that satisfies this condition of equality. So now we have the equilibrium characterization. So on the equilibrium path, in any sub-imperfect Nash equilibrium that is robust to small revision costs, the agent's actions on the path of play are going to have the following form. So if you look at this carefully, you will see we either end up with A2 bar at the end, right, in the second allocation, or or we end up with essentially, or we end up with 0 in the first allocation and some smaller volume. In order for us to get anything in the first allocation, we have to have the A2 bar. Right, so as you see, the equilibrium, the features of the equilibrium locations are conforming to what have been done formulately behavioral profile. So what's the equilibrium intuition? Again, the principal must always extract as much investment in the second location as possible. The reason why that was true is because he has an incentive to revise the initial announcement, right? He wants to stick with it. And the agent is anticipating that the principal will have this incentive. So the agent is underinvesting in the first and he's relative to the second. In the first policy-making stage, retention rules that don't do so, as I said, are not credible. If the principal is able to extract the budget and the entire budget with respect to the second allocation, he can credibly create additional incentives that that push higher first allocation. And knowing this, the agent is going to focus on the second allocation once the first is sunk in investing more heavily into it. Let me put this characterization in perspective for a moment. So in particular, let's think about the following baseline and So this is the, actually I don't want to use the word baseline because we're characterizing our first model as baseline. Think of it as a benchmark, right? The benchmark is the total allocation under ex-ante commitment. So this is supposing that the principal could commit to an announcement ahead of time, right, and was not subject to the time inconsistency problem that I've been characterizing. Well, the first thing to note is that the total allocation under the possibility of ex-ante commitment is exactly the same as the total allocation in this equilibrium, right? So the agent is held up to indifference, right, in both cases. The difference between them is efficiency, right? So the principal can announce, if he has an ex-ante commitment, right, he can announce a rule, right, such that he could get an efficient allocation. Without the ex-ante commitment, there's going to be a distortion driven by time inconsistency, and so that gives rise to this result. The principal is strictly better off under ex-ante commitment than under sequential policy making, except of course where it so happens, right, that the cap on the second allocation is set at exactly the efficient level. This is an intuition for the possibility of recovering the first best, right? It's easy to recover first best here. Just set the cap at for the second allocation to exactly the efficient level, right? And that's what you're going to do. And using, so this is in response to today's question. So if the principal can do that, he can get the first best, he can get rid of the time inconsistency problem. This is going to do better for him than any other budgetary environment, including the fungible budget, right? But, so the intuition here is, in effect, right, that doing so allows the principal to tie her own hands, achieving efficiency, but it comes at a huge cost, right? And the cost is, it's got to be the case for this, that the principal knows the production technology, right? And it's got to be the case that there is transparency. And he needs to know the production technology because he needs to be able to perfectly tailor the budget caps. He needs he needs transparency because he needs to be able to verify effort choices by the agent. So of course, this is raising the obvious question, right, of what happens when you relax these. And the intuition is relaxing one of them is going to change the attractiveness of the other. In particular, when we have high technological uncertainty, forget is great, when you have high technological uncertainty, ex-ante budget caps will be ex-post very inefficient, right? So the agent will be constrained to invest up to a certain level. You can think about the technological uncertainty as the uncertainty about just how much investment would be desirable to make, right, with respect to the first as opposed to the second allocation. So if the principal is imposing these budget caps, right, from the ex-ante perspective, he's going to do it efficiently, right? But of course, exposed, he's not guaranteed efficiency, and the greater the uncertainty, the greater will be this exposed efficiency gap. Without transparency, there's no time inconsistency problem, and there's efficient choice by the agent. But of course, you give up on transparency, you're going to give up on the power of incentives. By giving up on the power of incentives, you're going to get a lower allocation by the agent. Right? So from the principal's perspective, right, he is able, when he does this, he's harnessing agent's expertise about the production technology, right? But he is giving up the closeness of control, right? And sometimes he will want to do that. So that's what we're going to see next. We're going to introduce a little bit of structure to model technological uncertainty. Suppose we have the production technology, which we're going to write as P of AY2 and omega, where omega is a random variable drawn from the support capital omega according to a probability measuring mean, right? And we're going to suppose that for each omega, our production technology satisfies all of our previous conditions. And we're going to suppose that the realization of omega is the agent private information. So the agent knows what the efficient investment is, right? The principal does not. So we can define for each omega, right, and each A, right, for omega A pair, the efficient division of total spending A conditional on omega. Right? And to focus our attention, let's assume that the uncertainty is about allocation, not about the total productivity. Which is to say, for any pair omega prime, right, and for any value capital A of the budget, the outcome associated, remember this is the probability of success. The probability of success associated with the efficient allocation under omega is the same as the probability of success associated with the efficient allocation of the same budget under a megaproject. Right? So the focus of analysis can be just on the allocational efficiency. What do we get from looking at technological uncertainty with transparency? So in equilibrium, the principle's optimal second communication, is going to be independent of the posterior, right, following the history of the first message and the first action. Why? Because what the principal is interested in is maximizing the second allocation, right? And at that point, all he wants to do is as much of an investment with respect to second allocation as possible. It's no longer about efficiency. The best the principal can do is to choose in the technological uncertainty with transparency world, right? The best he is going to be able to do is to choose ex-ante optimal budget cuts. That's what this proposition characterizes. In the world of technological uncertainty without transparency, suppose the principal observes only the final policy outcome, right? That's our model of non-transparency. Here he cannot condition on actions, right? So the set of retention rules is all going to be action constant, right? And in any equilibrium, under any budgetary rule, the principal is going to retain if and only if success, right? And otherwise he'll fire. So we have the following result: fix a retention rule, right, from the set of action constant retention rules, and assume the budget is fungible. Right? So before fungible budgets were inefficient, right? You didn't want to go with a fungible budget under transparency. Under non-transparency, assume the budget is fungible, right? And then for any realization omega, right, if the agent spends positive resources, then she divides them efficiently. Right? That's very fungible budget here is attractive because it's not constraining the agent who's making optimal allocation choices. And if the principal uses the optimal retention rule, then she's weakly better off with a fungible budget than with a fixed budget caps. So now transparency versus non-transparency, when is he actually better off giving up transparency? All right, well, first of all, as I've noted before, the total allocation expended by the agent is going to be less under transparency than under transparency. Right? Why? Well, again, under transparency, the agent is held to indifference. Under non-transparency, he is not. Right? So, by the way, in the background of this is that agent would weakly prefer the non-transparent environment. Right? With a fungible budget, when the allocations are non-transparent, they'll be exposed efficient across tasks. Right? And so eliminating transparency can hurt the principal by weakening the agent's incentives, but eliminating transparency can help the principal by allowing her to induce the agent to utilize his expertise in making allocation decisions. Suppose that we have a function f which maps positive reals into 0, 1, and some pi, right, which will be a probability measure. And suppose that we can write our production technology as omega times f of a1 plus 1 minus omega times f of a2. Right? So the value of omega, in effect, is controlling which input, right, is the relevant input. Right? And let's suppose that the support for omegas is from nu to from eta to 1 minus eta, right? Where the probability of omega being equal to eta is exactly 1. Now, so think about these conditions. As pi goes to 1/2, right, uncertainty gets very large. Right? Either of these is going to be equally likely. This is very large uncertainty. As eta goes to 0 or 1, uncertainty becomes consequential. Right? Only one input will end up mattering, but which one depends on the realization of the mechanism. So we have the following result. So if the limit of eta is going to 1, right? So a of nt is the amount spent allocated under non-transparency, is greater than the a of fb is the efficient allocation with ex-ante commitment, right, over 2. Then there's going to exist an open set of parameter values, right, such that the principal will prefer non-transparency to transparency. So the intuition here is that when uncertainty becomes large and consequential, right, so here we're looking at pi's that are around 1/2, is that is going to 1, right? As uncertainty becomes large and consequential, the principal is going to prefer non-transparency if the diminished power of incentives, right, so the diminished power of incentives comes from the fact that, you know, we're looking at non-transparency, so this is going to be lower, obviously. So we don't want it to be too low, right, relative to what you can get on the transparency, right? So if the diminished power of incentives is small enough, the total expenditures don't drop by more than a half. And in the paper we show that we can, this is going to be true when production technology is not too concave, right? So the marginal value of additional investments into production is not growing too quickly, right? So you don't. It's not the case that you really very badly just want to increase the overall size of investment. And when the electro incentives are not too small relative to rent-seeking incentives, and the intuition here is you don't want to be in the world in which you just want to max out as much as possible the investment again because your utilities is concave, right? So when the investment is low, right, what you want is as high as possible. By way of summary and discussion, so what we're doing is we have an argument against for the value of giving up transparency, right, in this environment, which comes down to the value of trading away what you can think of as fine-grained control, right, for agent deference when the institutional setting is uncertain. So you can think about the production technology. So I've been calling it a production technology, but you can think about it as an institution, right? So the basic intuition is if you don't know the details of the institution, right, it's better not to control your agent. It's better not to try controlling your agent too tightly. Right? It's better to key off of outcomes rather than actions. Right? Just a bit of context. So there's an interesting contrast between our argument here and the Holmstrom-Milgram 1991 paper. They get a trade-off between efficiency and incentives, right, when a subset of tasks is observable, right? And so in particular, they find that weaker incentives can benefit the principal by reducing distortion. So there's a distortion there, right? There's excessive allocation to an observable task relative to a non-observable task. And so you can do better by weakening the incentives, right, in the Holmstrom-Milgram environment. In this model, there's a similarity, right, but there's an important difference. Here, weaker incentives are not a good thing, right? They are an unfortunate byproduct. They do not benefit the principal, right? It just so happens that you give up on transparency, right? You get weaker incentives, but you would rather not have weaker incentives if you can avoid it, right? So this is the contrast. And then another thing I wanted to mention, by way of placing it in the literature, is the comparison to the results from the repeated moral hazard environment in contract theory. So there are results from Fudenberg, Holmstrom, and Milgram, and Shapuri, and three other co-authors, that show that spot contracts are sufficient to implement long-run optimal contracts. And so, given those results, it's interesting that in this model, the equivalent thing does not happen. Right? The equivalent thing here is going to be the enforcement of the contract implied by the principle's ex-ante optimal outcome. And the reason why that does not happen is that, in effect, the power of commitment that the principle has in our environment is still smaller than the power of commitment in those models. And the reason why that is that, in effect, so those models work with renegotiation proofness. And renegotiation proofness requires the agreement of both parties, right, for renegotiation. Here it doesn't, right? Here, the revision proofness, right, that is part of our equilibrium environment is activated by a single party, by the principal, right? And so the principal, given that the agent is not party to this renegotiation, in effect, right, the principal is less able to be constrained by agent's agreement, and so he has even lower power to commit. Right? And so that's why we do not get the equivalent result.